true purpose of art and music. I've been playing guitar and writing music for the past 20 years, and it is an important means of creativity and self-expression. On the journey of spiritual development, one begins to realize that music has good, bad influences, and most of the great music, great is in inverted commas, seems to be creating non-sattvic influences. My questions are, there are 3 questions, A, B, C. So what to do? Should I give preference to Indian ragas over Led Zeppelin? How did your relationship with painting change after you realized the self? Is there any purpose to contemporary art and music beyond mere entertainment? Great questions. I can't help it. Very good questions, and allows us to introduce something here. And also, the questions themselves are multi-layered. They're very useful as well, very down-to-earth questions. So let's go through this and see it from different perspectives. So what to do when there is this process of unfoldment and one's relationship begins to change, when the purpose of art and music undergoes change as well, because obviously with the changes within, everything changes. Obviously the values, the preferences, the likes and even dislikes begin to change. Everything. It's a good sign when we actually experience these changes on the outside as well as on the inside, because it's not enough to experience changes within if that does not lead to some fundamental realignment in our environment, and that would include also our self-expressive potential. But it's not that straightforward. And indeed, it is safe to say that a lot, if not most, of our current art and music, and again, art here, we speak in terms of all different diverse fields of activity, from theater to dance to opera, from rock opera to classical opera to Philip Glass, is essentially represents different energetic qualities. Indeed, some entertainment is tamasic, while other entertainment is rajasic, and unfortunately, I would say that our current culture produces very little sattvic entertainment, as at the current stage of our civilization, in the current state of affairs, very little sattva out there, so to speak, because there's very little sattva in here. When there is little sattva within, then the collective consciousness essentially is gravitating towards that what we then call popular choices, popular music, popular TV, popular entertainment, everything. But the area of this is vast, and once we begin to pull the thread, then we cannot separate this from that, because it's not just about music, it's the food we eat, it's the books we read, it's the thoughts we think, which in itself is influenced by those 2 factors, the quality of food and the quality of information influences the quality of our thinking. How can that be otherwise? But your question is specific. So I will stick with the question. However, I also invite you to look at it in retrospect I'll invite you to look at it from overall perspective, which doesn't leave one stone unturned. And I went myself through these processes, and I've seen how people go through these processes and changes. You might have even heard me speaking, I don't know if these talks are out there, where at some point there was this, when this was accompanying the process of greater realignment, how I began to narrow down to what I would listen as my daily background, as my soundtrack, even still as a painter. Even still as a painter in my own studio back in the days. My musical tastes were very eclectic. And I'm only going into this because you asked me personal question here, how did your relationship with painting change after you realized the self? And I will talk about that as well. But first about the music. Ragas versus Led Zeppelin. At some point, what was mostly admired and listened, and it was very, very diverse, as I said, like I've listened hard rock and heavy metal and bebop jazz and Brian Eno and Arvo Part and Bach and Mozart and Schubert and even Rachmaninoff and Chopin. At the same time as I would listen John Zawinul and like the kind of stuff from Frank Zappa and Stockhausen, everything that would come into the sphere of my attention, I wanted to know, I wanted to hear. It's natural. Many artists are like that. There's nothing more special about my case than perhaps your case or anyone else, because if true artist wants to know what is happening around, true artist wants to know how the spirit expresses itself, true artist wants to know and wants to be in the presence of what is there in a thick layer, in a rich layer of a collective consciousness and a collective awareness. And we live in such time of such great fusion of cultures. It's like unprecedented time of influence. Maybe these influences were also before, but before it will take decades, if not hundreds of years, for, let's say, some Japanese forms of music to influence music in Spain, because it will take a long time along the Silk Route before it can come to China, and then from China to Central Asia and to Alexandria or Venice, before it will reach the court of Alhambra. It will be a long way before that influence can actually ensue anything, and maybe it will die by then, being covered totally by some other influences, so we will end up with quite a homogeneous sound of flamenco, with all its undertones that come from Berber music and Jewish and gypsies. But we live in time when instantaneously there's exchange of information. So of course, this fusion influences everything. And at some point, we begin to narrow down this vast diapason of interest. So maybe by mid-20s or late 20s, I don't know, with some perhaps it's earlier, with others later, what we've learned, we kind of stumble on what really, really resonates and in tune with these frequencies that we embody, because obviously it goes without saying that music, it's the most immediate sensory resonance, because we experience music through entire cellular structure, not just through our ears. We experience music through the entire cellular structure, through the skin, through the chest, through the tummy, through the throat, and of course, the nuances and the subtleties through the organs of hearing and the heart. But with that narrowing down, I've noticed that there was no desire to listen to music that I used to love. And it will be like some of the greatest music which I consider to be, my God, this is like inseparable part of growing up. It would just like hold no interest whatsoever. Because it's simply no longer in tune, no longer in resonance. But to cut this story short, there came a moment when I remember very distinctively that the music that I was listening on a daily basis was just that. The very harmonious about this had to be. So all the dissonance, all this kind of like modern jazz, it was out of the window. Certainly no heavy metal, no rock, no pop with its two lines, which is very numbing and dumbing. It was only music which will feel and feed the soul with the frequencies where perhaps the aptitude of the heart is felt on a daily basis, as I would paint still. Music was that soundtrack which kept me in touch with myself on a deeper level. No matter what was happening in my life, there was this great desire to have something, this, whether this is some Goldberg variations or something from the ragas that became more and more prominent. And indeed, at some point, what I have referred to before, just prior to that perhaps you have heard me speaking, that when the expansive process began, and when I've experienced what is known as the opening of the heart chakra, I could not listen any music for a long time. In other words, I could not listen to the most refined music. I could not listen to the most harmonious music. All the magic of the Mozart, along with his flute, was out of the question, was out of the window. Even Indian ragas, even the Gandharva Ved music, which was supposed to be the most sattvic music, I could not listen because I was in the presence of that internal music of my own, internal sound. But then interesting things began to happen, and this is why I want to give you this full analogy, because your question is ragas versus Led Zeppelin. And let me take this quick footnote. By the way, it's interesting to watch the transformation of the core of Led Zeppelin itself. We know that Robert Plant, whom I had the privilege to meet in person and conversed with him about his interest at the time in North African music. This was back maybe 15, 14 years ago, when he was doing a lot of work in Morocco with kind of more tribal, what would come under the category of tribal music, world music, away completely from amplifiers and away from the kind of like heavy, thick sound of that. He wanted to go into more acoustic and vocal, oral traditions. So, Led Zeppelin itself, you see, in their transformation, at least exemplified by the interests of its founders, the vocalist Robert Plant, he didn't stay all his life in this, and he went through tremendous changes. Even ventured into some folk music and country music, but always remained close relationship with the blues, because that's what he always had great affinity with, the blues of the South. So, how and what that brings us? How is that helpful and what that brings us? On one hand, indeed, our changes bring the necessity, or with the changes within, the necessity to have more sattva in our life. becomes paramount to the way we can embody that sattva, and that in itself is a natural process. People who have mostly tamaguna in them, they may actually benefit from very, very intense music in a sense that it's more moving emotionally, that creates this wave, so that at least not at least, because it shouldn't be really even qualified as such, but it requires a stronger movement to take the soul from this engrossment in the physiology. And when we say the soul engrossed in the physiology, it also talks about developing that thin, thick skin, being unable to feel to a full capacity of one's heart, not being unable to feel fully live. It's that kind of like how many people live a numb life. Very little is required, just a little tickle here, like a little like back scratch, and that's it, that's enough. All these are effects of tamaguna. For that, of course, a great waves, which will be essentially, will have to be activity in terms of what Rajaguna exemplifies, would have to be and will be beneficial to create that movement, to shake it out of that self-imposed slumber, from that self-imposed inertia. But when there is enough movement, when there is enough already, the next natural movement and propensity is toward a great equilibrium, towards greater harmony, which is what sattva is, equilibrium and harmony. And we begin to crave that. And of course, what could stand in our way are these conditionings. And mind can stand in our way as well. Mind, perhaps other factors that are creating a pact with, oh, wait a minute, that affects my persona. This is not who I am. I'm this wild Aerosmith guy with this and that. I'm this real wild Alice Cooper, right? I'm this, what's his name? The Black Sabbath guy, right? This is when we fail to age gracefully. It's like, at some point you have to get enough, satisfaction. Otherwise you can never get enough. It's only rock and roll, but I like it, right? It's of course it's only rock and roll and I like it. But if you like only rock and roll all your life, it's like, oops, is that all you can do? Like your rock and roll all your life and nothing else? Oh, fantastic. And that's not at all a criticism to Rolling Stones. It was an amazing band, still remains to be one of the most amazing musical acts. Authentic, it's entertainment. Rajaguna at its best. But on a more serious note, once there is this propensity, we better follow it. And great artists are known for not being afraid to witness the dismantling of their likes and dislikes, witnessing the dismantling of their personalities even, dismantling, realignment. That's what characterized all great artists, not to remain in a status quo. And you can find these analogies in many other musicians. One comes to mind also, which I'm not quite now in touch in terms of what he does, but look at the progression of someone like David Sylvian, the founder of Japan band back in the years, I think it was in the 80s, with his band called Japan in Japan. And his collaboration with the kind of semi-classical and semi-pop classical composers like Richie Sakamoto, some of the great immortal classics of our time. And look at his transformation. He's a devotee of Amma. He cannot produce the same nostalgic, kind of heavy and music anymore. There has to be a movement. If there is a movement in him, as there is awakening, there will be that movement. Or perhaps he would want to go silent for a while. And this is where I want to take this, because you asked me here, how did your relationship with painting change after you realized the self? And is there any purpose to contemporary art music beyond my entertainment? These are profound questions. Why are they profound? Because if I speak for myself, I was waiting for 2 years at least upon this major shift, major transformation of consciousness to begin painting again. Almost keeping it all alive on the go, like going through tremendous expense of having to rent a studio in a residential area of London so that it will allow me to immediately go into painting if such an impulse shall rise. All this waiting was in vain. No such impulse ever rose from the depth of awareness where I was perfectly at home and no longer anything, any act of self-expression was required. It caused me a lot of disagreement with patrons alone, because at some point they rebelled. At some point they began to ask me the questions, wait a minute, where is these paintings of an enlightened being? We want to see it now. Come on. Put your acts together, man. What is it? Keeping it all to yourself? And I wondered, sincerely wondered, why is it not coming in the form of the desire to paint? And perhaps I was holding this still, alesha avidya, being stubborn, that I did not want to paint just out of that propensity that I ought to, because I am so-and-so. Because everything, the personality of an artist ceased to exist. And that was amazing to watch itself, you see? It was amazing to witness how that who I consider myself to be simply was out, was gone. Even when I looked at my paintings and what I have done, there was this very different relationship. At first, indifference of an observer. But then, when the witnessing state of consciousness gave way to a more profound intimacy of what is known traditionally as God realization, I've realized that there's no difference. There was never a difference with what I did and the object itself. Subject and object are modalities in consciousness. For awareness, it's all the same. So, and yet, you will also find me speaking about the necessity for self-expression, and I never advised and advocated anyone to lay their creative arms and surrender to just sittings. I never said that. And I never will, because it has to be authentic, sincere, and not made in terms of, oh, great. So if I'm meant to realize myself, then anything that I do stands on its way, I better surrender it now. No. That's why you came to me with this question, because there is, as an artist, as a creative being, you feel that resonance. You feel that trust and you feel that intimacy, because you know intuitively where I come from, and that resonance puts essentially enough trust in you to pose such questions. Therefore, I would not tell you, you know what, sell your guitar, sell your Stratocaster, sell your Fender, and just start listening to the ragas, or get yourself a sitar and stuff. Maybe not. Why not? Maybe you should do that, but it doesn't mean that if you do so, you will near that what essentially you're so eager to experience. It's another one of those paradoxes. We need to do what we are born to do. As we're doing it, we're realizing this, and it's a spontaneous process. Whatever occupation, whatever activity, whatever we love to put our attention in, whatever field of interaction, whatever we are here to do, we should not renounce this activity. It's of no use. We should carry on as we are, and let's see what happens. Let it be all natural and spontaneous. If one day you wake up and you feel that there is no more feeling in your heart, nothing really moves you to listen Led Zeppelin and playing the chords, right? Then you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. And who am I to say you shouldn't do that? Maybe you have a record deal, and that's your job. But then, as an artist, as a colleague, I will tell you, well, do it at the best of your abilities. Bend the minds of the record company executives to your will as an artist. Or do what you really love to do, because that's how this world is sustained, by the love of those who do what they love doing. This world is not sustained by those who keep to the contracts. It is only sustained by those who give themselves wholeheartedly to what they love, whatever that is. And that's what the true occupation of the artist. And I realized that it doesn't matter, because the canvas just changed. The colors, the medium has changed, but I'm the same being as I was back then when I, as a kid, sat in front of that tree or in front of that elephant in the zoo doing the sketches. The same thing, just different mode of expression. Finally, is there any purpose to contemporary art and music beyond mere entertainment? It is for you to find out. It is for you to know. Yes, I don't want to sound, otherwise I'm in danger of kind of getting this, I don't want to put across this like I'm this cultural snob. No. Many who knows my tastes know how eclectic they are still now, and I have no problem in putting Stairway to Heaven now, and I will have just as much joy as listening Hari Prasad Charusia or Amarnath Rain Melody. Just now I can put Kashmir with all its 40 violins, and I just love nothing more than that. Because now it doesn't matter. It makes no difference whatsoever. In a sense, what do I mean by that? It's all expressive potentiality of my awareness. It's all Shakti. It's all Divine Mother expressing herself in myriads of ways. But at some point, we have to be honest to the process. At some point, Sattva has to take precedent. At some point, we need to experience that peace. Otherwise, we will not be able to taste that peace in the midst of that, what could be the most tumultuous activity. And, of course, from here, it takes us to this. Your question could be the question we should ask ourselves as we are on a threshold of creating new culture together. Is there any purpose to contemporary art and music beyond mere entertainment? I think this question was asked by all great artists, all of them throughout history, with no exceptions. With no exceptions whatsoever. From the great Friedrich Nietzsche, who constantly kept a check on where are we going collectively, to any artist today in any capital or in any province. This is the fundamental question, is what are we creating together? What frequencies do I put out into this universe? How do I spin this? What touch I add to this social sculpture? How do I imprint this? What is being the imprint that gives this reality its face as it is, that looks at me as I look at it. See, so these are the questions. But at some point, no one can answer these questions because these are existential questions. If I'll tell you that there's no purpose in contemporary art music beyond mere entertainment, then what I hope is that you would challenge that view as an artist, and you will tell me you are wrong. There is a purpose, and I'll show you that there is a purpose. Because whatever I put out, no matter how small in my own place or grand, because all this dimensionality is now changing, we gain different understanding. All goes into influencing of who we are as the world. All goes into that. So, in short, Indian ragas and Led Zeppelin, neither or, but both. Because at some point, it is the songs of Led Zeppelin that created that impulse, the strong impulse to move in a certain direction. Maybe if I was sitting and listening to the Indian ragas at that time, that propensity would have not generated enough movement. Who knows? Huh? I don't know. So, I hope this somehow sits with you in whatever ways. I hope this chimes and resonates. But thank you for a beautiful question.